It is time to finally like unleash the power rankings, the top five drivers. Um, Nate, I'll let you go first since your face is on my screen. Who you got?
Is this just this season currently
Yeah,
or
like
yeah.
not points because we know where they are in points, but like power rankings, how do we assess what we've seen so far?
So I think that it's hard to put anyone else number one but Max. I just think what he's done with that car, the fact that he's a point behind a McLaren after three races, given the difference in those cars' performances in the dry so far, pretty remarkable. So I think it would have to be him first. I'd actually put Piastri second. I know that I'm ignoring Norris as the championship leader here, but I thought Norris, he hasn't been as far ahead as Piastri as maybe he should have been. Um, and now I'm just desperately trying to think of what the rest of the field has done. I've got the season standings in front of me. Power ranking is a really difficult one because you kind of strip away points, but then points are also quite
Mhm.
important as well. And there's some guys in the midfield. So, for example, I was going to stick Alex Albon at third, just because I think that he's been performing really, really well at the moment, giving that Williams team, a really, really good feeling
Mhm.
when maybe they haven't had that for a while, and comprehensively outperforming Sainz, which obviously seems to be a theme of drivers who have switched teams aren't doing
Yeah.
so well. I'll put Antonelli in there as well, which is super harsh on George Russell because Russell's been outperforming him. But just
Yep.
contextually, I'd put actually, yeah, actually, you know what? I'll put Russell instead of Antonelli because even though I'm impressed with Antonelli, you got to put Russell up there. I think he's solidly performing in that Mercedes, and then Lando. You got to put Lando in the
So
top five. So
okay, so you've
I've
made this clear as mud. You've
yeah,
got
I've hedged my
Max.
bets. So I'm going to say Max number one, Piastri two, Russell three, Norris four, Albon five.
Okay.
Which is not the order I said them in, so I
No,
completely
I know.
understand that. I've completely messed up.
I don't disagree with your Max situation. I don't know if
Yeah.
Laz feels the same way, but like I don't disagree with that. Like I feel like at this point for the McLarens not to be miles ahead, one of them or both of them to be miles ahead given like what we thought they had and what we thought Red Bull didn't have. For Max to even be in the conversation, to be winning races and to be doing as well as he is, to me, it's a little bit of like, yes, he is the number one. Also, like until someone can unseat him, he's like number one. And he's still winning. I don't know. What do you have, Last?
So I'm going to go from five down to one. I'm going to say in fifth place, Alex Albon. Completely agree with Nate. I think performing well in that car. 18 points from a Williams. I mean, considering where they were last year, I think he's been doing a remarkable job.
And
In fourth
Williams have
place, maybe,
19 points overall, so it's literally all but one of their points. Sorry, mate, go on.
yeah, yes, Science just says the one. In fourth place, perhaps controversially, Oscar Piastri. I think what he did in Australia was a bit of a
Mm.
letdown. I know Lando nearly did the same thing, and it was just a matter of kind of probably a meter or two going further into the gravel that cost him, but it still cost him. And then I think the qualifying lap in Suzuka, he had the pace to do it. Again, there was a slight mistake, I think, in turn two. So that was a race weekend where he seemed to have the edge on Norris all weekend, yet didn't quite make it work in terms of points. So I'm putting him fourth. George Russell, I'm going to say in third, because, okay, Suzuka wasn't that good, but up to that point, he would actually be contending for the very top, I would say. He's only 4 points off Piastri, Mercedes versus McLaren. Pretty impressive in my book. Lando Norris, I'm going to put second because, I think he has performed when he's needed to. It's not always been absolutely brilliant. China sprint race was a letdown, but it's hard to find anyone with a perfect record on the grid so far, apart from that one man, Max Verstappen, who I have at the front. So
I was
it
going
was
to,
tricky. There are a few like notable others. I'd say like Ollie Behrman. You could put a really good shout in for him being in that top five of power rankings, but he had the bad Australia. But again, I think a lot of that was down to the car just being absolutely nowhere at that point. Where else could we go? Isaac Hadjar, maybe. I mean, again,
yeah,
Australia awful, but
I think Hadjar's a
since
really
then, I
good
think the
call.
pace he's shown, given the potential of the car, has been very impressive. And then Antonelli is another one who would be just on the outside of my top five, but didn't quite make it in.
It's sort of the same. Like I think not that like my opinion really matters, but we're gonna go with it anyway. Um, I have Max as my number one, and it's again just because everything I said before. I actually have Lando at number two, and I think for me, it's sometimes it's a matter of like taking advantage of the opportunities you're given. They should have done something different with his strategy. Um, and I don't know if I necessarily blame him for that. Um, I may and I also God, the qualifying lap from Max in Japan was like so absurd that it's like I credit that more to Max than I discredit Lando. And I feel like Lando has been taking advantage of the opportunities he's been given, and he's been there and he's been consistent, with the exception of like the sprint race, like you said. So like for me, Lando is second. Oscar, in my opinion, like is another one of I have him third. And again, it's like taking advantage of the opportunities that you've been given, with the exception of the qualifying. Like he keeps qualifying behind his teammate, and when he isn't, then he's beating him. But like you can't qualify behind your teammate, because that's an opportunity for them to like not favor you. Like you're shooting yourself in the foot. So like I dock him for that. Also, there was the Australian mistake. And to do it in, of all places, like Australia, that is your home race, like that just felt like extra gutting. I put George in fourth. Um, but I don't, I put George in fourth, but I also put Albon in fifth. And those were like very interchangeable things. But did you notice how not a single one of us had a Ferrari driver in our
Yeah, I
top
was
five?
just thinking, ours were all basically identical. And I was just looking at it now. I was like, are we being super harsh on the Ferraris? Obviously, they got
No, I
disqualified,
don't think we are.
but we're not. But I mean, Ferrari have just not had a. I think, I mean, if you were putting one of them in, it would be Charles over Lewis, I
Mhm.
guess. But then Lewis, I mean, how much credence do you give the, he is the one driver who's won a race, and it was a sprint race this year. But in terms of performances, Charles has been outperforming him. But I don't think he's close. I mean, if you were to say it's Charles or it's Antonelli or it's Charles to Lawrence's point, Behrman, power rankings, you have to consider the kind of the context around it. I would put Antonelli or Behrman above Charles right now. If I was saying who's your sixth, then it has to be one of those three. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but just shows you kind of the season that Ferrari have had so far. It's been pretty underwhelming,
Like how
Well,
given
far, well,
who had
how
to
here's the
go
far
thing.
in.
down would you have to go before we put one of them on the list? Like, would they make the top 10?
You need a podium at the very least before they
No,
can
no,
get
no.
up
I
there.
mean, like if we were doing the power rankings of all 20
Oh, I
drivers,
see. Sorry.
how far down
Yeah.
the list would we have to go before we saw a Ferrari driver?
I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'd named quite a few actually before I named the Ferrari drivers outside of that top five. But I'd say within top 10. But the problem with Ferrari is that, of course, what we're trying to do here, this exercise, is remove the quality of the car from the equation and just look at what the driver's done with the opportunities they've had. And we just don't know where that Ferrari is.
Yeah.
From race to race, it just looks like a completely different car. Even from session to session, FP2 in Australia, it looked great. And then it was nowhere when it mattered. So it's really hard to judge those guys at the moment until we get a better idea of actually how competitive that car is. Because it may be that Leclerc has been doing a mega job, and then also that Hamilton sprint win kind of does put him a little bit in the equation. I mean, certainly for a top 10, you'd like to think, because even Leclerc, his teammate, pointed to that and said what he did in sprint qualifying in China was exceptional. It was beyond what the car was really capable of. And then obviously he went and won it from the front, which once you're in the front, because of all the issues we were talking about with overtaking earlier, it's a lot easier to kind of maintain your tires and see the end. But the other interesting thing around Lewis is that after Suzuka, he did that kind of thing that Lewis often did over the last few years, where he just gave a little hint of what might be going on behind the scenes and said, oh, towards the end of this weekend, we found something that was wrong with my car and it's costed me about a tenth of a second. I'm hoping it's going to be fixed in Bahrain. And so a tenth of a second in this field is actually quite a big step, further up the grid and so on. So perhaps if it is the case that there's something on Lewis's car, whether it's purely a setup thing or whether it was just something that wasn't performing to the extent that they thought it should, if that gets fixed in Bahrain, it'll be interesting to see whether he can then put himself back into this talk of, top 10 driver this season. Because at the moment, it's hard, apart from that China sprint, it's hard to justify it.